Hi there, this is the History Hound. Greetings. In previous years, I'd be dressed like this, getting ready to take part in the In From the Cold Heritage Walk. But this year, for circumstances beyond our control, we're going to be doing it virtually. So I welcome you to my virtual tour. I guess I can go in and get warm and sit in front of a laptop and present my tour to all those people who so graciously gave their donation to In From the Cold. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I know In From the Cold will thank you as well. And so let's get started. I'll see you in a few minutes indoors. Enjoy.
Background. I've been doing the walks for In From the Cold for, I guess, 5 or 6 years. And each year we did a customized heritage walk. Now, nobody else was doing that. They would just go and walk. And first year I did it, nobody talked to me. I walked for 4 kilometers and nobody talked to me because they were so cold that all they wanted to do is get through as quickly as possible. And I thought, this would be fun. If I'm going to walk anyway, I might as well walk and talk to people about the history. So that's how I got started. So it's about 5 years, I guess. And of course, this year we can't do it in person. So I had the idea that we would do two. And one has been pre-recorded, and I believe Herb has already seen it. Yeah. But the second one, this is fresh. I am alive. Hard to believe, but I am alive here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Main Street, and specifically the heritage area that they designated. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of why they did that, because it was quite controversial at the time when they did it. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about Main Street from that point of view. And because I was hoping that we would have different generations so that we could get sort of an idea of what was in a building before. But I have my listings going back to 1910. So, we can figure out who was there, at specific times, if we want to. I'm not really a date sort of person. So I'm going to talk more, like I do on my tours, more about the buildings, some of the memories that we have of the buildings, what makes them unique. I'm not going to concentrate too much on the dates. If you're interested in that, I've already done walks that have been taped that you can take a look at, and I tell you who built it, what date it was built. But most people, to be honest with you, are not into that. I know when I was going to school, particularly high school, I wasn't interested in memorizing dates. So that isn't one of my loves, but I love talking about people and just sort of the things that happen. So with that, we'll get started. And I'm not a super technology person, so let's just make sure that I can do this.
If I just might interject, I went on the walk with you last year, Richard, and it was captivating. Thank you so much. It was excellent.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. So as I said, we're going to take a look at the Main Street Heritage District, and just to give you a little background on how this came about. Newmarket has always been very worried about the fact that I guess there could always have been the possibility that somebody would take down one of the buildings, or would decide to make some sort of revision to the building, which was not, I guess, particularly conducive to its history. And so Newmarket decided, as a lot of communities have done, to proceed with designating a whole area, which many jurisdictions have moved towards doing. This way, what happens is you have a blanket coverage. You have a coverage of of an area that you believe needs to stay intact the way it was in the old days, however you define the old days. The old days for me are the 1950s and 60s, but for a lot of people, it goes back, to the 20s and 30s. So this is exactly what they did. Now, this was fortuitous because for those people who have, or if you followed the things that happened on Main Street, a developer came along and decided that he wanted to turn the post office, which had been closed, he wanted to turn that into a high-rise. And his original plan was to have 7 to 9 stories. And of course, first of all, that building is a beautiful building, but second of all, it wasn't going to be conducive to the area. And so the citizens fought the developer about this development. A lot of people were against it, but there were still people who thought it was a great idea. Let's put a big high-rise, put in a big apartment building. It'd be wonderful, be in center of town, it'd be convenient, whatever. But because the town had gone to the trouble to have the whole area designated, they were able to win against the developer. Now, that didn't mean that they didn't go to the OMB and threaten each other, but eventually they came to an agreement where he wouldn't proceed and he would instead put the property back on the market. Now, it still hasn't been sold, but I guess, which is too bad for him, but I think it would have been a mistake to put a big tall building there. So that's the reason why they decided that they wanted to designate the area. And I know it's a unique idea because, for one thing, a number of the properties on Main Street were already designated under the Ontario Heritage Committee. And of course, the post office was designated as well under federal responsibility. So there were some buildings that were pretty well protected, but the other buildings weren't. And Victoria, you may remember back in the 70s and early 80s, if you were still around or if you came to visit, Main Street was starting to deteriorate. People weren't taking a very good care of the street and their properties. It was getting a little seedy. We had a couple of pot shops open on Main Street, and there's some really a big concern. Well, one of the things that this designation has done is it's made available monies to people who own properties on Main Street to draw upon to upgrade, to beautify their property, whatever way you want to put it. And so that has certainly helped. It's deterred people from getting the idea of taking down buildings or doing things to buildings that maybe aren't appropriate. So that's a second part of it. And as I say, it offered a blanket coverage of all of the properties. Now, both of you have seen Main Street, and as Herb said, he's been on the tour last year, and a number of these buildings aren't in very good shape. And we've had some discussion about whether they really should be protected. But I guess they went ahead and did this, and but there is some leeway as to what people can do with the properties. And along the way, when we're going through the different properties, I'll talk a little bit about plans for upgrades to the buildings that are seen to be congruent with the purpose of having a heritage area. Okay, so what I did was I listed the buildings that we're going to take a look at. This is basically all the buildings that fall within the designated area. You'll notice in the title I have the list of the designation. A lot of people don't understand how designation works. They actually have to pass a bylaw which enacts the protection. The particular bylaw that is a blanket bylaw for the whole area that we're going to be talking about was done in 2013, and it was bylaw 51. And it covers, as I say, the whole area, and we're going to look at the map in a few seconds to see the area that's covered. But it's one bylaw that covers all of these properties. So as you can see from the first slide, most people will remember many of these properties. I should tell you that you may know the buildings by another name, but since it's my presentation, I got to name the buildings according to how I remember them, or the way that they were when I was a kid. So this will pretty much date, my age. So that's the first section. Second section. So there's basically, I believe, about 60 properties that we will look at. My estimation is that we will probably take, probably about an hour, a little over an hour, might be a little bit longer depending on how much we talk. I've left, because there's only two of us, I've left the microphone on. So if you do have any questions along the way, be sure to ask about them. This is what I hope to do today. I hope that we're going to take a look at the area and talk about why these buildings were designated. Take a look at the individual properties, perhaps not in detail, because I've done other presentations where I've done them in detail. So we'll probably spend a little less time talking about individual buildings and talk about how they fit into the mosaic of Main Street. We'll take a look at the significance of the buildings. If we had a multi-generational grouping, we probably could have talked about what it was like in the 40s and the 30s. But unfortunately, I'm late 50s up to present time. So, and I think you pretty much fit into the same time period. Maybe Herb was back a little bit further, but that's good. And finally, what I want to do is look at the future. What do we have to look forward to for the future? Now, I should mention at this time, I mentioned that I've done the walking tours previously. This whole idea of going out and walking the whole route and taking pictures was an idea I had. I thought it would be a shame if we couldn't do it this year. And I should thank you at this point for supporting the cause. If you don't know, In From the Cold is a organization that runs 365 days of the year. It feeds people, it houses people. I remember somebody, when I first started doing this, somebody contacted me and said, well, I don't know why we need to have a place like this, because there are no homeless in Newmarket. And I guess I looked kind of perplexed, and I said, so you never go downtown at night? Because at night, sadly, people are sleeping in the doorways of the buildings or in the park. Lions Club Park was a very popular place for people to go and sleep. So this is the reason why I got involved in doing this. Part of it was that I just love to do my walking tours and talk about the history of Newmarket. It's a good opportunity. So this is the area that we're talking about. What we're looking at is essentially it is Main Street. In some cases, it stretches back to the railway tracks in order to take in an area. The reason for that was that when they were first coming up with this plan, they were looking at all the things that could possibly go wrong. And one of the things that they felt could go wrong is particularly on the east side of Main Street. The properties often went back into the floodplain, and they wanted a way to control people building on the floodplain. I don't know, you both probably vaguely remember Hurricane Hazel, but Hurricane Hazel, one thing it did do is indicate to us that whole area behind the stores on Main Street is prone to flooding. It was a disaster in 1954 when we had Hurricane Hazel. So they decided that they would extend the boundary back to the former edge of the Holland River in order to make sure that people could not build there, both for safety reasons, I guess, and also to keep the historic feeling for the area. It essentially starts in the north. It starts at the Dr. Scott House, which is just north of the Registry office, or right now it's the Elman Campbell Museum. So it starts there, and it moves south as far as Darcy Street / Water Street. It is on the north side, but does not cover the south side. So you wouldn't have the Presbyterian Church covered. You wouldn't have Ferry Lake covered. These are covered under other designations, and so it wasn't felt that that was necessary. So this gives you an idea of the area. So essentially, we've got Millard Park, Botsford, Timothy, down as far as I say, Darcy and Water Street. It stretches not quite back halfway between Main Street and Church Street. So it doesn't cover primarily the houses that are up the side streets. It just covers the main street. Now this is a map actually from the 1890s, and it gives you an idea of what Main Street was like then. So we'll point out a couple of things which is interesting. First of all, I was born and raised on Queen Street and Niagara Street. Well, this will give you an idea because Queen Street at that time was called Lot Street, and Millard, which was not there at that time, was called Lot Street. You'll notice that a number of the roads did not go through to the east. They terminated at Main Street. So, the buildings were a little bit, what would you say, there wasn't the access that there once was. Main Street, of course, was an old Indian trail, as you probably know, which we made our Main Street. The other thing that's important to understand is before 1900, Main Street was not a commercial street. Yes, there were businesses on Main Street, but it was primarily a residential street. And I just want to point out a couple of things. You'll notice on the map here, there's a number of houses here. People lived on Main Street. And as we go through this list, I'm going to point out a couple of cases where the house is still there. They're just behind the stores, but the houses still exist to this day. So we'll take a look at that as we go through. You notice that as well, I think it's important to take a look and see that on this map of pre-1900, we see the Railway Hotel, which of course now is the King George Hotel, which was there. And we see basically no other real building that that is there now. Fire, of course, has been a big problem for Main Street, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The fires that we've had in Newmarket, but hopefully you can see this map well enough to see that they're primarily houses on the street before the 1900s. And what would happen is that if you were a merchant, and if you had lucky enough to have a house on Main Street, you would perhaps turn your parlor. You may even build an extension to your house at the front and put in a shop in order to be able to conduct business. Sorry, I have to have some water here. Now, the other thing, just a little bit of history that I think is interesting, is of course Newmarket started right here. This is the area where Newmarket started. Mr. Hill came here and built a mill on the area between what is now Timothy Street and Water Street. Mr. Rowe came along, and this is at that time was the famous part because there was a huge trading post there. Everybody knows the story of the trading tree. Well, the trading tree is associated with William Rowe. William Rowe built a trading post at the corner where, when I was growing up, it was called Cousins Dairy, and it was on the southeast corner of Main Street, across the road from the Presbyterian Church or the Hydro building when I was a child. And that whole area was a trading post. It obviously disappeared, early in our history. But the interesting thing, I think, is this. I've done many walking tours. I've done a lot of articles. And I always have young people say, well, why would you bother building there? And I would say, well, it was because it was adjacent to the Holland River. And people think about the Holland River, excuse me, as it is now, which is basically underground with a little bit of a creek. But at one time, as you can see, the Holland River was a major river. Just to give you an idea, about here would be the office specialty buildings. And this whole area would flood. This is the last time we had the major flood, which was in '54 with Hurricane Hazel. This whole area was washed out. And what this brought to the attention of both historians and also the people that lived here was the fact that there actually is a river flowing underneath the ground here. All they didn't remove the river. All they did was they buried it, essentially, put concrete, then put soil and turned it in some cases into a parking lot, in some cases into a public area, very nice public area. The other thing, so that you keep in mind that this was a major river, is the fact that, first of all, this whole area along here was dotted with mills that were all using water power. So they were all drawing their water from the Holland River. As well, a lot of people weren't aware that up until the 1940s, the office specialty drew water from the river. Now, in the 1940s, they were beginning to bury the river, but it produced a great deal of water. So, we need to keep that in mind, I think, when we're looking at historic downtown. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this map before we move on is that you can see behind the buildings, it was all vacant land. These are actually pastures. So, quite often what would happen is that people who lived on the other side of the river would bring their cows down and allow them to graze behind Main Street. So I think that's sort of an interest for most people. Now we move ahead to 1904, and as you can see, we're starting to get some buildings that are specifically commercial. We have banks, we have hardware stores, this sort of thing. Again, I think the thing that we need to remember here is that, I often, when I do presentations, whether they be walking tours or whether they be at organizations that I'm doing a speaking engagement, people will say to me, well, it's very important that we keep these buildings because, they are the original building. Well, sadly, they're not. And I sort of opened my comments when we started by indicating that fires have been a real problem for us. And I don't know how many of you have read my articles, but in several cases I've written articles about the scourge of fire, how it has affected us. We have three major fires to talk about here. In the 1840s, there was a huge fire which consumed almost all of the east side of Main Street. As well, there was a small fire that broke out in the area about midway down between Botsford Street and Timothy Street, which destroyed the buildings there. So they had to be rebuilt. So as we go through our list of buildings and properties, I may make reference to the buildings that are fairly new as a result of a fire which destroyed the original building. The big fire we had here was in 1862, and I know that's quite a long time ago, but 1862, everything was wiped out. And in one case, this is really the reason why, and again, another plug for an article I did. I did an article on the Shrinkley brickworks, and one of the reasons why this man was very successful with his brickworks was that up until he came along, all the buildings on Main Street were wood. I don't know whether they didn't understand the concept that fire destroyed wood, but some of the buildings were destroyed 2 or 3 times. They would rebuild and it would burn down again. So finally, Mr. Shrinkley came along and he was making bricks locally on Prospect Street. I don't know if either one of you remember the brickworks when it was, you could still see it. Now all you can see is the marshland from the brickworks, and you can always go on Newmarket today and read my article on the brickworks. But it was renowned for the fact that it had yellow brick. So while many of the buildings on Main Street are painted, some of them aren't, and you can see the original yellow brick. The plus side of it was that it was a nice brick, and it was fairly inexpensive for the people to build their buildings. The downside was that we discovered it doesn't weather very well. And the famous story, of course, at the Christian Baptist Church, they built their church and their steeple with the brick. You notice that the steeple is closed. It's been closed certainly as long as I've been alive. The reason being that the brick is decaying and is unsafe. So the reason why they painted most of the buildings on Main Street was to protect the brick, because the brick was starting to become very porous and wasn't maintaining very well. I don't know if that's a bad thing for Mr. Shrinkley. I don't think at that time they probably understood that the brick that he was making was not going to last forever. We tend to think that things will last forever, but of course they don't. And this is 1959, so this is my time period. And as you can see, big difference. First of all, building up of the buildings along the other streets. You can see that we now have Botsford. We now have Timothy going all the way through. We have bridges over the river. I don't know if you noticed in the earlier maps, but there were no bridges over the river. The only bridge that existed was the Water Street Bridge, which made it kind of interesting because, of course, if you wanted to bring your cattle over to graze, you needed to find some way to get over the Holland River, and so Water Street was how you would cross. And if you care, that's how Water Street got its name, because it was the only place all along Main Street where you could cross the river. So, some things of interest here. You notice we're starting to get the more and more buildings built. You're starting to see, or you can see the fact that the houses are disappearing from the area, and that now there is only primarily businesses. Some of the things that you both will remember from the 1950s, we have the old arena up here off Timothy Street, the Loblaws, of course, store, which I used to go to often. This is where my mother did her shopping. You know, everybody knew it. Everybody will remember, you know, at this time, at the time of the map, 1959, it was called the Roxy, but it became, of course, excuse me, when I was a young person, it had become the Odeon Theater. And you may not know that across the road over here was the Strand Theater. This is where the original movie theater was. And when it closed, this opened. And it was opened by the same people who had owned this one. So see if there's any other places that stand out. Of course, in 1959, most of the buildings that were there then are still in some way still there now. We had a huge fire in 1957, which destroyed, starting with the Roadhouse and Rose. It destroyed part of Roadhouse and Rose. It destroyed, of course, the old Era office, which was too bad because the Era office was one of two buildings that had the old Prairie front. When it was destroyed, the only remaining one that was left was our family property, which was Lucy Memorial. And it was one of the reasons why it was designated very early, because they were so afraid that my grandfather was going to take down the building. The building had originally been built in the 1840s, and it was in bad condition. Sadly to say, I don't know which way you look at it, but sadly to say, it's still there, still in not very good condition. The cost to fix it is extremely high, and so it just sits there decaying. I don't know what's going to happen to it, but it is designated, so they can't really do very much about it. But it's outside of the heritage zone, so you know, let's hope that they do something about it. Anyway, that's 1959. Now, the confusion with most people who are doing research on Main Street is that previous to 1936, Main Street was numbered differently. What happened was that the Main Street was numbered from Water Street going north. So the Coffer building, which is, thank goodness, still in the corner of Main and Water Street, was number one. It was, that's where the numbering started. And of course, they increased as you went to the north. After 1936, they decided that they would change the way the numbers worked, and they would work in reverse. So they would number Main Street from Davis Drive coming south. So that's the reason why, as we go through this very quickly, you'll see that a lot of the old records before 1936 will give a address for a building, and you scratch your head and you say, well, I don't remember that building being on the northern part of Main Street. Well, in fact, it wasn't. It was in the southern part of Main Street, but the numbering had changed. And again, the next one shows us the northern part of Main Street, and as you can see, the numbers were increasing as you got towards Davis Drive. After 1936, it worked the opposite way. So if you are doing any research, you know, I would suggest that you keep in mind that in 1936, all the numbering changed. So I always, when I was doing my walking tours, I think probably Herb, you got a copy of this last year. I usually give people a copy of this because it helps when you're looking for an address or you're looking something up from the present Main Street. If you have this, it sort of gives you an idea of what the number used to be back in previous to 1936. So we start our tour, and I always start anyway with the Old Town Hall. This particular property was designated first on its own, and now, of course, it's part of the downtown designated area. It was actually built in 1883. It was built as a display hall and also as the market. For people who grew up here, they probably will remember that the area to the front and the back was a market square. This is where people went to shop for their goods. And the Old Town Hall was, in fact, built to accommodate, first of all, the town offices, but also to be an indoor market. And of course, it has migrated over the years. The interesting thing I always think is that during Mr. Twinney's reign here in Newmarket, he was bound and determined he wanted to take this building down. The cost he felt to fix it and bring it up to standard was too great, and it was really by the grace of God that this building is still there. There was so much opposition to the taking down of the building that it made it through his reign, if you want to put it that way, and it's still there. Of course, it went through a very costly renovation a few years ago. Many people will remember from the paper that the initial cost was supposed to be $1.5 million, and in the end, it cost $13 million to do. Not really sure why that happened. I think part of it was that they didn't do a very good job in the beginning of figuring out what had to be done. And second of all, of course, they didn't take into consideration that it was just full of asbestos. And of course, the asbestos had to be all removed in order for it to become a public building. So that had to be done. The bell tower, you may remember, both of you may remember a time when the bell tower wasn't there. The bell tower was rebuilt and re-put on there in 1984, courtesy of the town. The town actually, it was designed by my uncle, George Loosby, from a replica of the original bell tower that was there. And the town built it and they put it up. There was big ceremony when they put it back up. So I think it looks a lot better with the bell tower on. But again, this is a building that was designated previous to the designation of the area, but it is I think it's pretty special. One of the things I'll point out here is that it is built on a stone rubble foundation. That's important to remember. I'm going to be referring to that as we go through our list. It's important to remember because almost all the buildings on Main Street are built on stone rubble. So in other words, they're not built on rock, on firm rock. And one of the arguments that was made when they were thinking of building the big apartment building, the multi-story apartment building, was that they felt that in putting in the foundation for that building, and of course it was going to have to be quite a foundation along with parking, that it would in fact disrupt all of the buildings along Main Street because they're just sitting on gravel. They're not sitting on bedrock. They felt it was possible, at least the outside architects thought it was possible that if they started to dig up where the post office is, or if they did anything to that property, that in fact what it would do is it would cause all of the buildings to sag. So, as we go through, we'll talk a little bit about that in a little more detail. The Christian Baptist Church, again, the building that you're looking at was built 1874, 1875, and I promised I wouldn't do dates, but for some of the more important buildings, I put the date there. It is actually the third building that actually stood there. The first building was a building that had been moved from Main Street and was sold to the Christian Baptist Church. Of course, it was a wooden building and it didn't last very long. A second building was built there, again, that was partially wood, partially stone. It again didn't last very long, and this building was built. As you'll notice, it's a nice white color. It's not white because it's actually was originally white. Originally, it was a combination of yellow and red brick. And if you take a look at my articles, I did an article on this this particular property, and I often post pictures of the Christian Baptist Church. You'll see that that it was both red and yellow brick. It's unique because of the beautiful stained glass windows inside. One of the sad things, I guess, about it was that this stained glass window that was at the, I guess you'd say, the east end or the back of the church was actually covered over when they were putting the new organ in, which is kind of sad. But the rest of the original windows are there. This is a very old church. You probably, or maybe actually you don't, because neither one of you are around Newmarket now, but this church was up for sale. The people decided that it was going to cost too much to fix, and they actually put it up for sale. It was up for sale for a long period of time. And with all of the regulations, because it's a designated property, all the regulations that it has regarding the church, people backed away from buying it. So I guess officially it's still on the market, but I doubt it'll ever be sold, because you can't change the building, because it's being designated. A lot of people are superstitious, so they don't want to put a business. There was a gentleman who originally thought that he might want to put a bar and nightclub in here. But of course, a church is not the place for a bar or a nightclub, and so it's still there. The next building we take a look at is the Stuart Scott House. When I was growing up, this, of course, was a law office, but Stuart Scott was a doctor. He was the head of the school board, local school board. They named Stuart Scott School over on Lauren Avenue after him. Nice building. As you see, two-story red brick. It was an original house on Main Street, so this gives you an idea of what the houses look like that was on Main Street. It's really nice if you ever get a chance to go in it, because it's got a beautiful center entrance hall, which the people that own it have kept. Now, the North York Registry office is now the library, the Elman Campbell Library. This particular registry office was built in 1884. A lot of people get confused because this building was built to replicate a building that was actually on the corner of Main and Millard. Millard didn't go all the way through, and there was a building that looked exactly like this. That building fell apart and was taken down in 1952. And so this was the building that remained, but it looked exactly the same. It was designated very early, actually back in 1987, because it was its architect was a gentleman named John Stokes, who was a very famous architect who designed this building. It was originally the registry office, so one of the great things was that if you're at all a nosy person, what you could do is you could go down and you could go in. Let's say you wanted to find out how much your neighbor paid for their house, or you wanted to find out something about a property in your neighborhood. You could go down and they'd open up the big books and they'd show you all the records for the property. Of course, all those records have been moved and put online, but the actual physical records were moved to Richmond Hill, and so it's no longer a registry office, and now it is the museum. One of the things that's unique about this property, and of course, I'm not an architect, so I'll just tell you, the thing I find interesting is it's got what they call a double ceiling. So basically what's happening is that the ceiling is, you've got the original ceiling, and then you've got a second ceiling put in, and there's a space, what they call a fire space. Obviously, being a registry office, it had to be fireproof. It is totally fireproof, that building. And because of the double ceiling, it's felt that a fire couldn't possibly burn in that building. Obviously, being brick, that helps, but also it's got a complete air pocket around it, which would stop, they say, the spread of fire. The old fire hall, it's interesting we call it the old fire hall because it was actually built in 1952. It replaced the original fire hall, which had been there since the mid 1800s. And again, it was an awful building. I have pictures of the original building, and it was a horrible, horrible building. Bringing you up to a recent time, this building has recently been turned into a brewery. It sat empty forever and ever. The reason it sat empty was that a lot of people wanted to put a restaurant in here. The difficulty is that the land is saturated with chemicals because it was a fire station, because of its previous life. When it was an old fire station, they used to dump all the old water and chemicals into a cistern, and so it ruined the water table in the soil. So it sat there for empty, but finally now somebody is using it as a brewery. They can't serve food there, but it's turned into a brewery. They fixed it up. It really, really looks nice. The Dales Wesley house. This is famous. We're going to talk about two things. First of all, you can see the house in the background. I've always thought it was a shame that the town allowed anybody to build this monstrosity, this part of it, because this house, if you're ever in town and you want to see a beautiful, beautiful house, walk around the corner beside the church, take a look at the house. That house is a gorgeous, gorgeous house, huge house. As the name indicates, it was owned by Dr. Wesley and Dr. Dales. It was the hospital here in Newmarket before they built York County, which I think makes it kind of interesting. Dr. Wesley and Dr. Dales wanted a place to be able to put their patients when they were recuperating, and this is so they opened up their home to do that. But it's pretty much hidden from the street by that awful building that is in front of it. But, you know, what can you do? As they say, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous house inside. So if you are ever in the area and you get a chance to walk around and see the building as it is, it's gorgeous. And as I've noted on the description here, it was actually restored in 1981 by an architect. The people that owned the building decided that it needed to be restored because it's getting a little beaten up, because it had only been used as a rooming house for many, many years. So it was restored back to its original beauty, which I'm really happy to hear. The Royal Hotel. Now, this is actually was a hotel. It's been turned into, as you can see, it's both commercial and retail. You have building and commercial establishments in the lower half, and the top half of it is still the hotel part of it. This building is owned by the Plater family. Wesley Plater convinced the family to buy it as an investment, which I'm absolutely delighted that he did. This building is two-story, as you can see. It was built in 2 stages, and it's a very large building. As I say, people live on the 2nd floor of the building and also in the south end of the building. A lot of, if you take a look at the history of Newmarket, a lot of businesses were in here. As you can see, 150 Main Street. At one time, this is where the photographers, there were 2 photographers that were located in this building. And so when they were renovating this building, they found a lot of old photographs of Newmarket, thank goodness, that had been left behind for some reason by the photographers that had actually been doing business there. You can see a doctor bought it. And what he decided to do is he decided to put a sanitarium in there. Now, sanitarium, if you know the word sanitarium, most people know sanitarium is a place to go if you've got some sort of communicative disease. But back then, this property was like a I guess you'd say, a place where you would go to recuperate. So when you think about it, this was a hotel, and he would designate 3 or 4 rooms within the hotel, which he would use as the area where he would send his patients to recuperate, which I think is kind of cool. And eventually, as I say, it was converted to stores. And if you read any of my articles, I make reference of the fact that some of the buildings, historic businesses that have been located in this building. Now, this building is gone. At this point, it's an empty parking lot. It's being used by Roadhouse and Rose. The building was purchased by the Plater family, and it was taken down. But when I was a youngster, this was the George's laundrette or cleaners, and kind of an odd building. It's only 1 story. It's got a flat roof, concrete base, and as I say, I was, in one sense, I was sad to see it go, but it wasn't being kept up. It's like a lot of Main Street. It in the 70s and 80s was vacant, and it, I guess, was destroyed. But now it's no longer there, and I'm happy I have this picture, and it's a parking lot there. Do you have any questions so far? You're so nice and quiet.
Richard?
Yeah.
No, I and just back, if we can just go back a bit to where you were talking about the numbering of the street of the property.
Yeah. Yes.
You said it was, the change was in 1936.
The first change, yes, in 1936. They did it again in 1953.
Yes, right. That's right. Because we were 47 Main Street. We lived upstairs. So my parents, the travel agency was at 47 Main Street. And then it changed to 212, I think 212
Yes.
Main Street.
Yes, exactly. And the change that took place in the 50s, well, they didn't really do much renumbering. What they did was they sort of tinkered with it. What they decided to do was that they used to number the buildings by block.
Yeah.
So if it was a block of buildings, in other words, it's a large building which held 4 or 5 individual buildings, that building would get only 1 number. What they decided to do is they decided that each of the individual sections of the building would get their own number. And if you read my article about the coming of postal service to Newmarket, this is the reason why we had the renumbering of the street. The numbering was horrible on Main Street. The post office, meaning Mother Post Office, federal, said you need to do something about the numbering, not only on Main Street, but all through Newmarket, if you expect us to be delivering letters to people's houses. And hence, that was the thing that really pushed them renumbering the buildings on Main Street, and actually all through Newmarket, not just Main Street.
Another question and a comment, if you don't mind, I don't know time-wise, but when you mentioned the fires, so I recall in Market Square, so just behind the Botsford block, right?
Right.
There was, I think I sent this, I emailed you about this a couple of years ago. I don't know if I heard back from you, but it was about the fires. So they had a dairy there with horses, and the horses would carry the milk, wagons through town. And then the fire, all the horses died. They had stables there, right behind Market Square,
Right.
And then the fire, and then that was the start of when they used small trucks to start delivering. At least that was that dairy. I don't know the name of the dairy, but I still remember that was quite an event when the stables burned down and the horses all passed away.
Yeah, well, you're going to see a picture at the end of this presentation of those stables. So.
Oh, really? Oh, I'd like to see that.
Something to look forward to.
And one other little comment. So just off of Timothy Street, over the the train tracks came over the Holland River. Very, Holland Ditch. It was very small. And for our boys my age, the challenge was to go and sit up on the girders underneath when a train came over. So a train would come over the trestle bridge, and you're sitting there and you're hanging on for dear life, and it's just shaking. I did it once or twice, and that was a badge of honor, that you could actually get under there, and you think it was the end of the world coming. But those, what a memory that was.
Yeah. Well, memories are wonderful.
That's right. Thank you.
So, Victoria, do you have anything to add or any questions?
Not really. What you refer to as, I think, the Dawes house, it's just, I think in the background here, that's
Right.
what my grandmother generation would have called the hut house, H-U-T-T.
Ah, right. Yes,
And-
sorry.
I'm sorry?
No, I was just going to say it had a number of names. That house has been constantly lived in.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are a lot of families.
Yep. And my grandfather was a doctor over in the Stuart Scott house there
Oh,
in
cool.
the 20s.
Yeah.
And so that hut house is always in the background of the photos, which I will send you.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
I know that when I delivered the paper, on my route was that house, and I was always intrigued, even back when I was a youngin', with the history of that house, and it was gorgeous inside. And I used to think it's so horrible because people aren't taking care of it. It was becoming typically it was becoming a very run down because people didn't own, and people were coming and going all the time. So it was kind of sad.
Well, as you say,
Go ahead, Victoria. Sorry.
I just wanted to say, I like what you said, how Main Street really has been transformed recently.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It has. For those of us who remember the 1970s and 1980s, it was going to be the death of Main Street. There's no doubt about that. I mean, when I do my presentations, I have a set of slides which I use for that, where I show the 70s and 80s, and Main Street looked awful. And of course, you will remember that probably. The area just south of the post office. I remember them always, the police there all the time, because there was a place that sold drug paraphernalia and was actually selling drugs. It was kind of a tough time. Chester Best and a number of the old time owners of Main Street had sold their buildings, and the new owners, I guess, were only interested in the money and never came here. We had a lot of absentee ownership of Main Street, but that, thank God, has changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have some questions about further down Main Street.
Yeah.
We will get there.
No, keep going.
So, once we get there, and I'll stop every once in a while,
Yeah,
but
no, for
you
sure.
can ask me questions too. Because I've left your mic on, you can ask questions.
No, carry on. I'm going to get back to you, not on this presentation. I've two little memories that always stick in my head, and I just wondered if you have some more insight into what I'm thinking about, but that's for another day. Thank you. Carry on. You're doing a great job. Great job.
Okay. So everybody knows Roadhouse and Rose. If you take a look at their ads, they'll tell you that the oldest business in Newmarket, but they weren't always here. But Roadhouse and Rose, and you have to, I think, I have to give kudos to Wes. Wes is a real history buff. Both he and I learned our history at the knee of my Uncle George Lusby. So a couple of things. This is an older building, so for Victoria, who probably hasn't had an opportunity to see this recently, first of all, this section here of the building looks fairly new. This was actually burned when they had the fire in the 1950s. It was originally, and I don't know how much you know about Roadhouse and Rose, but Roadhouse and Rose was actually two different businesses. He had the funeral business and the casket business, but he also had a furniture business. And this section over here was the furniture business. This section was the funeral business. And what happened was when they had the fire and the area to the excuse me, to the south of here burned in the 50s, this was destroyed right up to this original building. As well, this building had a third story, very ornate third story. And of course, not thinking of it, I didn't put a recent picture, but Wes came along and Wes rebuilt this third story. So he put it back to the way it was from a picture that he had from the early 1900s. And it must have cost an awful lot of money, but I constantly give kudos to Wes Plater because that was his initiative to put it back the way it was, and it looks incredible the way it is. Anyway, just to talk a little bit about this building. Go back before I move ahead here. Go back. So it's the oldest building, but they weren't always located here. The original building that they had was down just north of Queen Street on the east side. That building, of course, is no longer there. And then they moved from there down to Main Street, almost next to the Simpson building. My article today is about Robert Simpson and Simpson Sears. Well, he had a building at the corner of Main Street and Timothy Street, and almost next to that building was where the funeral home was originally located. And of course, they came up here, and it's been there for a long, long time. If you take a look at old pictures of Main Street, it's been there for a long, long time. And I don't really get into the architectural side of it, but I always put down for people who are really into it on the slide, what it is known for. I don't know, maybe it's a good opportunity to mention this. If a building is going to be designated, it's not just a whim. You have to prove to the Ontario government why it should be designated. And so these are the descriptions that come from the paperwork when they wanted to designate these buildings. So while you listen to me, you could read what is on the left-hand side of the screen and see why it was designated. These are the things that they say are unique and therefore merits being saved, being designated. This is the Colonel Lloyd house, beautiful house. The reason why I think this is a nice house is this is one of the original houses. So if you were on Main Street before it became a commercial thoroughfare, just an example of a house. Colonel Lloyd was a big shot here in Newmarket. As you can see, it was a house that was originally designated back in 1987. So it was protected before it became part of the Main Street Heritage Zone. One of the things I think is interesting, and of course, if you get to go into it, it's a beautiful, beautiful house, and it's been well maintained. But one of the things I like about it is its bay windows. It's beautiful, beautiful, and the people, as they say, have maintained it very nicely. Now, when I was, and I'm sure Victoria will remember this, maybe you will remember this, Herb, this is where the Simpsons order office was. This is where you went, you had your Simpsons catalog. You would go in here and you would order whatever you wanted out of the catalog, and then it would be sent here. You would go and pick it up here in this building. Obviously, then it's had, like most businesses, it's had many tenants, many people who have done business out of here after it was the Simpsons order office building. As you can see, it was a delicatessen. It was another of those buildings that was sort of falling apart. It was purchased by some people who have turned it into a travel agency, a very upmarket travel agency, and they're doing well. But this building was damaged in the fire, but was rebuilt. So And of course, when they did the rebuilding, and you'll notice this as we go down Main Street, when they did the rebuilding, a very common thing to do is to put this sort of aluminum storefront to sort of cover the burnt areas, so to speak, of the building. This particular building has been called the Four Seasons Building as long as I've been alive. These people are still in business. I don't know how many generations. It is, of course, a commercial building. I always wondered if people lived upstairs, and that is used by the tenants of the buildings, but isn't for rent, so people aren't living up there, as far as I know. Underneath it, it's got the famous yellow brick, strictly yellow brick, but it was covered, as I say, with aluminum siding. It also is sitting on a stone rubble, which means that it's particularly susceptible to any movements around. So if you do renovations, so this is one of the things that they found when the people renovated the property to the north, or to the part of the building to the north, was that anything they did caused the building to sag because it's all sitting on just loose stone. Again, it's got a flat roof. That seemed to be very common building style for Main Street. The Trinity United Church. Just recently I did an article not only on this church, but also on the Methodist Church, and the fact that the Methodist Church started their churches primarily on horseback before they built their original church, which was on the property where the Alexander Muir School was. But this building was actually built in 1879. I remember as a child it having two entrances. Victoria, do you remember that? Where it had two entrances. It had an entrance here and an entrance here. And this entrance wasn't there. And what they decided to do is they decided to take out these two entrances, and they put in a central entrance into the church. When I was a child too, and again, I don't know if you remember, Victoria, there used to be a water fountain here. The top part of the fountain was for humans, and the bottom part of the fountain was for horses. And they took that down as well in the late 1950s. So I don't know if you remember that. Beautiful church inside. And again, I guess I'm pushing my articles, but if you have an opportunity, or if you don't read every week my articles, it's been covered in two articles. I did an article just on this church, and I did an article as well one weekend on the Methodist Church and the people who eventually moved here. As you probably know, the Methodist Church was to get together with the United Church, and it became the Trinity United Church. So there was sort of an amalgamation of churches, and that's how the United Church, it became the United Church. But for a long time, my grandparents used to call it the Methodist Church. These are the old town halls. The interesting thing about this, and maybe you do or don't know this original building at the front, this is was Dr. Yes, you had a question? This is Dr. Rogers' house. So it's originally an old house. And so this building, well, most people know it as being all one building, is actually Dr. Rogers' house, which is still there, and a second portion that was added. Now, the reason it was added was because you remember at one time we wanted to make sure that Main Street had the town offices. And so the town took this building over, and they built in the back here the administrative offices for the town. Of course, that didn't last long. They moved from here to the tannery on Davis Drive, and this building became totally commercial. But at one time, this was the town offices for Newmarket. It's a Queen Anne style house, if that means anything to you. And I kind of like this place. And to know that it's an original house on Main Street, I think is pretty cool. The post office. Post office was built 1914, 1915. So it's always been there as long as I've been alive. But the interesting thing is that this building, the Simpson building, which we will take a look at in a second, this building actually used to extend to the corner, and there used to be a number of businesses in this area. I did an article, of course, on the post office, but I've also posted frequently on my Facebook and other venues pictures of the building that was there. And of course, across the road at that time, there was nothing. It was a vacant lot. And so we put in a post office here. This post office, being that it is one of the early post offices built by the federal government, was designated. The interesting thing about this building is that it's actually sitting over water. I remember as a child, one of the great things was my mother had a friend who worked at the post office, and she used to take me down to the basement, and you could listen to the water going, running underneath the building. So the building is actually sitting on pylons, and there is water running underneath it, because the parking lots, and maybe you remember this, Herb, the parking lot right behind this post office used to be a huge pond with an artesian well. And that parking lot that is there now still sits on top of the artesian well in the pond. I was down there one day. I got a phone call from somebody saying you should come down and take a look at this. The town was down. They were drilling a test hole through the pavement of the parking lot between the post office and what is now the library. They put a hole in, and as soon as the hole was completed, they had a plume of water shooting into the air. Oh, I'd say I'm bad with distances, but I'd say certainly at least 20 feet in the air. So, you know, the argument always was when the gentleman wanted to build the apartment building here is that he always said there was no water underneath there, so there'd be no problem in putting in a building with, you know, going down and putting in a nice cement basement and pillars and putting it underground parking. But I was one of the people who was able to show the original plans for the building of the post office and pictures of the artesian well that was there, indicating that this is all built on water. So for them to have had to do this, they would have had to find, first of all, some way to get rid of the water and make sure the water didn't flow. And that was going to add millions of dollars to the cost of building the building. Okay. When I was a kid, this was called Dawson's Ladies Wear. This particular building was one of the buildings that was severely burned in the 1960s. And many, well, you probably will remember if you were in Newmarket in the 1960s, that this building, along with all of the buildings down as far as Campbell's bookstore, were burned. This is a reconstruction of those buildings. So I think that's kind of interesting. As well, the original building had a little building built off the side, which was a Chinese laundry. And the interesting thing is that the actual name for the building was the gentleman's name, Chinese Laundry. You know, nowadays you couldn't do that. Nowadays you could not take a building and call it the Chinese Laundry. People would go, how can you call it the Chinese Laundry? But back then things were very different, as you probably will remember. People did all kinds of strange things. And one of the things that they did was name buildings according to the people who were in it. As well, and this is a good picture here. If you see this vacant area here, there used to be a building before the fire that bordered onto Dr. Rogers' place. When after the fire, they didn't bother rebuilding that building. They turned into a nice little parkette, which is kind of nice with steps going down. The interesting thing, and I mentioned about the post office being built over water, Originally, the water used to come from the artesian well in the pond across Main Street and down that hill. And to this day, when we get a lot of rain, when they built this and they built the steps going down, they built it in such a way that the water could flow down there. Because what they discovered was that the water is going to go down to the river, they better leave a spot open. That's one of the reasons why they didn't build another building there, was because this is a natural waterway from the water that is where the post office is, and adjacent to the post office, headed down to the river, the original river. Now, when I was growing up, there was a huge fire here. This was all destroyed. If you see the building here, and we're going to get a better look in a second. This was, when I was growing up, was the Campbell bookstore. Everything burned to the north of here, but he didn't burn. One of the reasons for that was that when the original building was here, they had built, of course, up higher, and they had put a wall in, obviously, to hold up the building. When it burned, when this burned down, they discovered that Mr. Campbell had in fact put in a second wall in his building, and so there was a natural firewall. So when the fire was burning and burning all the property to the north of here, it stopped at Campbell's bookstore. And a lady who lived on the second floor, a lady, Mrs. Duffield, I remember her telling me in an oral history interview that I did with her, that during the time that it was burning north of her, right up to the wall, she could put her hand on the wall and it was cool. So there was no heat coming from the huge fire that was burning the rest of Main Street to the north, which is, I think, kind of cool. It's a two-story building when they rebuilt it. And it was built, let's say, in the 1950s after the fire that burned down the original area here. If we go back in history, this building, this area was actually a hotel. It was called the Central Hotel. Beautiful, ornate hotel. You know, it's a shame, but the people who bought the building decided that they would take it down. So this building, there was no reason to take the building down. They just simply took it down because they wanted to build something more modern. And of course, you know, this is one of the fights that we have currently here in, well, actually all over, is if you buy a building, do you have the right to take it down? Even if it's old and historic, do you have the right to take it down? People who spend a lot of money on a building say, yes, I do. I don't like this old building. I want to put a new building in. So as you can see, that problem is not a recent problem. This is a problem we've had for a long, long time. Okay, so the Charles Simpson building. This has got long, long story. First of all, the part of the building where it says flowers. During my generation, this was the Bud's photography studio. You know, one of the rites of passage when you were a child was to have your parents drag you down, to have your face immortalized in a portrait taken by at Bud's studio, photo studio. But this building is primarily historic, and it's called the Charles Simpson Building, which includes the entire building here, because this has now been divided into two buildings. But the entire building is called the Charles Simpson Building. Charles Simpson was a druggist, and he died very early, and you may have read my article. His wife was left with a number of children, and she decided that she would go back to school and she would learn to be a druggist. So hence what she did was she went back to school. She became, I think, one of only two druggists, female druggists at the time. She was the only druggist, the only female in her course, becoming a druggist. She took the business over. She made it a great success. She sold not only the pharmacy part of it, but she also sold all kinds of handicrafts and things like that. She lived above the building. I'm spending a little time on this because of the story behind it. Let's go back. Because of the story behind it. What happened was that this whole area was built by a developer, as I said, same developer who purchased, I should say, the post office and wanted to turn the post office into a 9-story building. When he was turned down, and this is how the story goes, different people have different stories. He decided that what he would do was he was never going, these buildings had fallen into disrepair. So he said to the town, he went and got a permit. He said, what I want to do is I wanted to fix these buildings up because I want to sell the whole lot and they won't sell because they're dilapidated. So this is what I want to do. So the town gave him permission to do this, even though they are historic buildings. They gave him permission. So lo and behold, one day, I get a phone call from somebody and they say, this building is no longer there. It's gone. It's history. So I thought, oh, they've had a fire or something has happened. Well, as it turns out, the gentleman, I guess in spite of the fact that that he wasn't allowed to build the big building, took this building down, demolished it overnight. So we're talking 11 o'clock in the evening, it is there. 8 o'clock in the morning, it's not there. Trucks have taken it away, completely demolished, empty. So the town went to court, and there's a lot of back and forth. But eventually, the town forced them to rebuild the building. So if you come to Newmarket and you go there, you will see that the building has been restored. Not just restored as a modern building. The town told him he has to restore it the way it was. So the same historic building. So he was fined $250,000, and the estimate is it cost him close to $1 million to rebuild that building. So kind of a stupid idea to take the building down. But if you take a look at the building now, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous reproduction of the building. Not the same, obviously, from a historic point of view. It's not the same building. But I argue that, first of all, he had no right to take the building down. But second of all, it's nice to see that the building has been put back the way it was. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about with this building. Next door to that, and this is one of the remnants, I guess you'd say, of the 1970s, 1980s that I was talking to Victoria about. These two buildings are pretty decayed. Actually, this is all one building. Are pretty decayed. They turned into just horrible, horrible places. The interesting part of this is that this building, where the pizza place is, was not an original building. It used to be a walkway. So there was nothing here. What you used to be able to do is walk down Main Street. Let's say your car was parked in the parking lot behind. This was an alleyway that you could walk through to the parking lot behind. Very early in the 1930s, somebody got the bright idea, hey, this is unused land, so let's build a building here. So that's exactly what they did. So this was, when I was a kid, this was a laundromat. This has always been a pizza place, as long as I can remember. These buildings as well have been restored. The gentleman, Mr. Forrest, who took this building down and had to rebuild it, also remodeled these buildings. So they were put back to the way they were, which is good. So now all of these buildings are now entirely restored to their original quality. So they got rid of all this awful aluminum siding and put back the wood facade that was here. They took off the aluminum siding down here and put it back brick the way it originally was. So it's all really, really beautiful. But again, I emphasize, a lot of people don't realize this. This is all one building. It's not a series of buildings, it's all one building, which I think is kind of interesting. This building on the other side, I know it as the Campbell Building, but its actual name is the W.N. Starr Building. It's both commercial and residential, so there's people living above it. It was originally designated before the whole area was designated. It's a two-story building. I don't know whether, I suppose Mr. Campbell was here when you were a young'un, Herb. I know in Victoria in my time, and certainly Mr. Campbell was there. This is the place to go and get your school books. Our parents went there to buy china and all kinds of stuff. But this building is one of the oldest buildings in Newmarket. It is, along with Roadhouse and Rose and along with Lusby Memorial, are the only pre-Confederation buildings left on Main Street, which I think is kind of interesting. The building has been a number of things over the years. It was a Jack Fraser's at one time. It was a place where you went to buy gently used clothing one time. It's been a lot of things over the years, but it's most famous, of course, for being Elman Campbell's bookstore and china shop. Mr. Starr, just to mention, operated a bookstore before Mr. Campbell. There also was a bakery. So if you go to the second floor, you can see the ovens still there that were there when it was a bakery. So it's a really very interesting building. And again, it's been nicely restored and it looks really, really nice. On the other side, the Dollar Tree store, which of course is not there, it then became a sort of a chic furniture store, and then it fell into disrepair in the 70s and 80s. It was part of the area that Mr. Forrest bought and allowed to go into disrepair. He has since brought it back to the way it was. But when I was a child, it was called Gamble's Store. And Victoria, you may remember this. This is where your mother would go or your grandmother would go to buy fabric. When you went through the front doors, first thing you see is a huge pot-bellied stove and a counter the entire length of the building. And on either side would be all the things that you needed in order to sew. So you'd have all the linens, all the fabrics, all the needles, all the threads, everything. That was what Mr. Gamble did. Before that, it was a hardware store. So it's been a lot of things. Do you have a question? Anybody have a question?
Richard, yes, I had a list here. This is the store that I remember. The pot-bellied stove, the hardwood, oily hardwood store, and a long table, not a desk, bigger than that.
Right.
Where you would lay out the fabric and then cut it and that. And a great memory. So I think one store over here, there's a little laneway down to where Roscoe's is that not correct?
Yeah, laneway's gone.
Oh, laneway's gone.
Yeah,
Gone.
yeah. They like most things, it was seen as being valuable land, and so they
Yes, right.
They enclosed it all.
Because I still remember that Gamble's was at the end, was the last store.
Yeah.
So where that says Le Club, whatever that is, that's then where the laneway was.
That's right. That's right. All been closed in.
Honestly, I can knock this one off my list then. Knock it off my list. Thank you, sir.
Good. Okay, we better keep moving. I'm taking you too long here. Okay, so I talked about Campbell, talked about that. This, of course, is Robin's drugstore. He was there forever and ever, still there. His daughter, who we went to school with, Victoria, is still there. Susan is running it and still doing well. And not much I can talk about. I bet you, maybe you did know, because you're a pretty smart person, Victoria. This building and this building are the same building. So the way they put a different front on this building than this building, but it's all one building, which is kind of, I thought was kind of interesting when I first started doing my research. Okay. This is the Stiver Vale office. What can I say? It's always been there. Old building. Been a lawyer's office since the 1930s. Started with Mr. Stiver, and of course then he brought Mr. Vale and Mr. Pepe, Mr. Harrington into the practice. It's still there. Still a beautiful building, well maintained. I've been in it a few times because my lawyer is in there. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. So, forward, Rick. On the corner. Now this is interesting, and I will spend a few seconds on this building. This is obviously a new building. This was built, but it's in the place of building that was it was a hotel, and the North American Hotel. North American Hotel is famous because when Mackenzie was raising his I guess you'd say revolutionaries, his band of revolutionaries to overthrow the government, get rid of the family compact, came to Newmarket to speak here in Newmarket to try and get support. And as you know, if you've been reading my articles, or even if you remember your history from Newmarket, Newmarket was the center of Mackenzie's rebellion. This was a hot spot for a rebellion. But anyway, Mackenzie came here. He needed a place to speak on the second floor. So right where this is here, I've got my pointer. There used to be in the old balcony. There used to be a balcony here in the old building, and this is where he stood to talk to the multitude that are under here. The amazing thing was at the time, Newmarket's population was 1,300, and they say there were 5,000 people out on Main Street listening to Mackenzie speak. So, you know, if you see 5,000 people at that time coming to Main Street to listen to him speak, you got a pretty good idea that, you know, he's got a very welcoming audience listening to him. So that's one of the things that's interesting about this building. When I was a little boy, this was called Marigold, the Marigold shop. It was a china and gift shop. You know. Next. Cassidy Flowers. There's pictures from back when Cassidy Flowers was there. Of course, this building has been, you know, a number of things, of course, over the years. Again, it's still well maintained. It's 3-story, although it looks like it's kind of a short 3-story, sitting on stone rubble. We've talked about that before. And this walkway has always been there. As far back, my grandfather started taking pictures in 1902 of Main Street. And the first picture that I have that he took happens to have this laneway in here. So this laneway's always been here. And the interesting thing is when we had our fire in 1950, of course, this is where the fire stopped because of the fact that there's no place for it to go. Next door to that, we have the Codwell block. And of course, it's hard to tell from this picture. I should have had a better picture. But this whole area, these are all the same building. All they've done is each of the stores has a different facade, but it's the same building. And it's called the Codwell block. The little piece of interesting information about this is that this building was originally wood. And I mentioned how long it took to figure out that wood burned. This building was actually the site of a furniture making place. And, you know, nowadays we can make fun of people, I guess, from the past, but the gentleman that had the property and the building made furniture. So make furniture, it's full of wood, both manufactured and wood waiting to be manufactured, full of sawdust, had 4 open hearths, a fire. It burned down 3 times. 3 times he rebuilt it, always wood. Finally, he said, I've had enough of this. He decided that he would go ahead and make it a brick building. So that's one of the interesting things I think about that building. And again, it's an area that has fairly recently been redone. Looks beautiful. So again, it helps that the people can get money to fix the front of their building. Also helps to get tax incentives to make their building look, nice. It's 2-story, and the building to this building here has 3, and that's the way the building was originally built for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, I'll try and move quicker. I didn't intend to keep you this long. I'm sorry. This is called the Reformer Block. In essence, when I was growing up, it was called the Whitfield Building. When I was a little one, this was used for many things. As you see, in 1942, it was the town of Newmarket's offices. So on the 2nd floor of this building was where the town offices were, where the mayor was, where the administration of the town was. It was the Imperial Bank at one time, and before that it was the Walter Plater store, a relation or a relative of Wes Plater and his people. So it's had a beautiful history. The building is intact. It's been well maintained. Right now it's kind of the furniture and nostalgia business, and then upstairs here are a number of small businesses, and some people have actually been able to live on this top floor, which I think would be a great place to live. The Granada restaurant, you may remember this restaurant from the days gone by. This was part of the Millard Block. And I mentioned earlier in the presentation that most of these buildings are attached. People don't realize that they are part of a block of buildings. And I mentioned in the numbering of the places on the street, it used to be, these 3 buildings would have the same address. They didn't bother putting separate addresses because it was all considered to be one block. But in essence, now it's 207 to 209. This was my hangout when I was a teenager, the Granada restaurant. It burned to the ground back in the 70s. You may remember the fire. And then it didn't burn to the ground in the 70s, it burned. And in the 1990s, the whole facade was all that was left. Everything behind it was burned, and they rebuilt. So that's pretty good. It's on stone rubble foundations. Again, another one. It's on the stone rubble. And I don't know whether you ever noticed, but most of these buildings have got flat roofs. It wasn't until I started doing my walking tours and preparing for these tours that I realized that majority of the buildings had flat roofs, which is, I think, kind of interesting why they were flat roofs. The William Wallace House. This house, or this building, obviously, by its name, you know that it was a house. And the 2nd floor is still houses people. The 1st floor, of course, when I was a child, this was Sports and Cycle was located here. And the interesting thing about this, I think, was that this building was purchased, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And at that point, I was a consultant for Heritage Newmarket, and I was going to the meetings. And the gentleman came and said, I would like to do some different things. I'd like to change this building. And of course, brought all of the architecture for it. And so the town planners took a look at it and said, your plans don't look like our plans. And the interesting thing is, this building, and you can see this little, how it's been built out from these original doors, this is all illegal. Whoever, somewhere along the line, the people were able to build this extra part coming out towards Main Street, but the town had no idea it was there, or they didn't notice. I don't know what it was. It was all built illegally. So I think that was kind of interesting. Now, of course, it was grandfathered. They didn't say to the guy, okay, you're going to have to take this out. But it's funny, after they told him that this was all illegal, he just went away. He didn't ever come back and ask to make changes to the building. The thing that I remember about going to do a site view of this is the basement was so horrible. It was the creepiest place I've ever been. First of all, it was still dirt on rock. There was no electricity in the basement, and it was dripping with water down the walls. So it was
Richard,
yeah,
if I might, can you go back? So here's the memories. So this is 208. We lived at 212. So
okay.
Just as you're saying, so there was a cycle place here. This,
Right.
where they built out, that was deeper, just as you're saying. That was deeper by maybe 3, 4, 5 feet.
Yep.
And this was Lee's restaurant, Lee's
Okay,
China restaurant.
Yep.
And so we, if you see right, the little brown part right above that little light there, that's
Right.
that was our living room. And there was so the what am I going to say? The storefront of that building there has come out. It was recessed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the front of the restaurant was as deep as the previous, like it was further back.
Yeah.
And so I would, for a hot chocolate or maybe a quarter, I would shovel the snow, and that was Lee's restaurant. So that brings back a lot of memories. We were lived right next door.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
And that place next door now is a place that sells, it's meatless. The name has.
It's the noodle place. It's the
noodle place. Exactly. Yeah. So
Yep.
there's. Okay, I better continue on, or we're going to be here all night.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you.
Hempin's Jewelers is there now. It was, when I was a kid, it was called Yates Jewelers, so it was still a jeweler's. But this particular property, again, was a Botsford house. And so it's an old house. But it's funny, when you walk on Main Street, unless you know that this was a house, you really wouldn't, it wouldn't come to mind. You would think these were two different buildings. You would think that they were built for commercial, but there actually was a house, a huge house. And the house was divided, and they built the stores out of that, which I think is kind of interesting. 2-story. And again, if you read my article today on Simpson, I make reference to this house, and so you can read the article if you get a chance on Newmarket today and learn more about these buildings. This was the house. When I was a youngin', it was a bank, but now it is a fancy restaurant and brewery. Beautiful building. One of the sad things, I think, is that just recently the town planners have given these people permission to build another story on this building.
Yeah, that's too bad.
And I think that's kind of sad, because this is all level all the way up. Now, what you're going to have is this building being tall.
Yeah.
Also, too, the question that I asked when it came before the committee was, will this collapse? Because this is all sitting, this is one of those ones that's sitting on just stone. you know, if they build another story, is that going to be too much?
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, in many cases, they don't listen to you. But this is part of the Caldwell block that I mentioned. So it's all one building all the way up.
Yeah. It's right across from where we lived. Right across.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I say, it was a bank at one time.
Yeah, it was a bank. Yeah.
So there's a better picture of the sports and cycle shop. And of course, your place was next door.
Yeah, right there.
That's
Yeah.
why I don't have a good one of that. Okay, this
Yeah.
was Smith Hardware when I was a child. Before that, it belonged to Mr. Binns. But it was Smith Hardware. And again, this walkway was always there.
Mm-hmm.
So when they had the fire, that helped in this area not burning. Yeah, just out of interest or a piece of trivia, there are 8 fires that I mentioned in my article about the fires. But in total, I am told that there have been over 25.
Wow.
So fire was, you know, and you think they would have figured out that wood burned. You know, it's interesting. Anyway, this was Smith Hardware, again on stone rubble. It's got aluminum front. For whatever reason, that became a big idea. Still flat roof, and all the way down, you know, same level roof. Nappett's is next door. Again, as long as I can remember, he's been there. 2-story, metal inside or metal in front. It's joined with the other buildings, so it was shoved in there. It's all part of one complex, all same level, you know, roof.
So Richard, there was right in the recessed area, there was a doorway there, like a door
Right.
to the apartment upstairs, and there was an older lady there. And every year we didn't have a television, so the treat was to watch the Toronto Santa Claus parade, black and white. Go up, and she'd always give us little Christmas treats, and we would watch the Toronto Santa Claus parade. What a memory.
Remember her name?
No, do not remember the name. No.
Because I used to watch Santa Claus parade next door from this window.
Oh, are you kidding me?
And the lady and the lady's name was Goring, Marjorie Goring, and she was a crippled lady.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So
Yeah,
two
very
next
interesting.
door watching.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this building's still very much the same. It's been fixed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, next door, we're the Charles and Nelson Botsford building. This again was part of the house. So house. This was the Botsford house, and he had a shop here, which was like a carpentry shop, and hence it took the name of Charles and Nelson Botsford House. Stone rubble. You know, we're getting used to this. Property was inherited by Nelson Botsford from his father, but the original house, and again, if you take a look at the today's article, I have a picture of the original house so you can see what was there originally. I think this is interesting. I like gossip. The property was left to Nelson Botsford. He couldn't pay the mortgage, and his brother Charles took him to court and took over the building. It's wonderful to have a close relative who also is not averse to litigation. Dr. Peck's dentist office across the road. When I took this picture, it was called the Teddy Bear Picnic. Doris Blair's was here. Doris Blair's Ladies Wear was here when I was a kid, and beautiful building. And again, this is where Mrs. Goring lived on the second floor of the building. But it was a dentist office and that's where it got its name. It's the Dr. Peck building. This is called the Millard Wesley building, and again, looks exactly like the building to the side. I like the fact that it's got still got the door coming out and a little bit of metal work. And sometimes when you go down on Main Street, the people who live on the second floor will come out here with a chair and sit and watch everything going on Main Street. It's kind of cool. Again, on stone rubble. The building was originally destroyed in 1862, and they built a new building made of brick, and it's fire resistant. I think it's a nice building. I think all in all, I'd say the buildings on Main Street are pretty nice. I think it'd be a shame to see them disappear. Carlton Restaurant. When I took this picture, obviously it's the Emerald Palace, but it's Carlton Restaurant when I was a kid. It probably would have been when you were a youngster. Herb, again, stone rubble. It's an interesting building. Kind of went into disrepair in the 70s and 80s, but I think it's come back a little bit, which is good. Again, a lot of people don't realize that this place where Travelodge was, I think it was Travelodge, may have been Travelodge when you were a kid, Herb. But this building, which is full 2 or full 3-story building, was actually a house. And the interesting thing is, this and the house and the property next door are the same house. But what they did was, of course, they divided them they put in a wall, and because there was a fire on this side, we'll look at that in a second because we're going to look at that picture in a second. But the interesting thing is that both of these buildings were the same height, and there was a fire, and they decided not to rebuild up here. So it's just the 1-story next door, but it's all part of one building, and it was all part of a gentleman named Alfred Wilby's house. The Robert Simpson store, and of course, I won't talk very much about this because this is part of the article that came out today. Or if you didn't know, Robert Simpson, who moved to Toronto and built the big store in Toronto, which was part of the big 2, Eaton's and Simpsons, started here, came to Newmarket from Scotland, was here for 15, 16 years, and did pretty good business here, had partners, whatever. You can read the story as it is in the paper today online, but so I won't go into that. But this building is same building. On the ghost tour that I do, we always go down the basement of this place because one of Newmarket's first murders and grisly stories and never solved stories is the murder of a gentleman named Robert Smith. And real mystery. He died, he was cut up, they never figured out who did it. The reason why this is an interesting place to go from the ghost point of view is to go down, it can be like 100 degrees outside. You go down there, you actually are freezing to death in that room, only that room where this guy died. The people who, it's now a tea place, tea and sandwich place, and he doesn't have a refrigerator. He keeps all his stuff down in that particular room. Doesn't matter what time of the year it is, things stay frozen. That is odd. And of course, across the road, you have the China shop. It's called the China shop because that's what it used to be called. And as they say, you can see it's a good picture because you can see it used to be the same height as the building beside it. There was a huge fire on the second floor. It burned, and they never bothered rebuilding the second floor. So as long as I can remember, and as long as my mother could remember, there was never a second floor here. And it looks kind of odd because all of the buildings are tall except for this one. I think that's kind of odd. The Bank of Montreal. This used to be well, at first it was a hotel. It was the King George Hotel before the King George Hotel was the King George Hotel. It was actually owned by a family called the Forsyths, and it was a wooden building. and it was a hotel back in the early 1800s, and it burned like everything else. And then the people moved across the road to the King George Hotel. And the King George Hotel's first name was the Forsyth House. And there's a plaque on Forsyth House. And you remember, Herb, when we walked with me, I told you that it's my grandmother's relatives that owned that place. So I know the Forsyth House or the King George Hotel pretty well. So the Bank of Montreal is a nice building. It's still there. It was after they moved out, it stayed vacant for quite a while, but it's been purchased by a gentleman who sells bicycles. Believe it or not, he bought this entire building. On the second floor is a deluxe apartment, so you could people could rent, or you could rent up there. My understanding is that when it went up for rent, he was asking a little bit less than $3,800 a month to be up here, and it's mainly because you have a view 3 ways: to the west, to the east, and to the north of the town, and it's high enough up that you can see. So I think it's kind of interesting. And the thing that you probably will remember from growing up is, first of all, it's got a lion on front. I didn't get this picture. I should have got a picture of this. It's got a lion on the front of the building, which is, I might add, still there. And it's got the Corinthian columns, which I always thought were cool. Across the road, we have the King George Hotel. And I mean, what can I say? King George Hotel has been there forever. 2 interesting stories I always tell about this. First of all, the fact that I was related to the first people in here. Second thing I think is interesting was that during Prohibition, it was purchased by the Prohibition people, the Women's League for Prohibition, and they ran it. And the reason they bought it was that one of the arguments against Prohibition had always been that a hotel could not exist if it could not sell alcohol. So they bought the property to prove that you could run a hotel and be successful without selling alcohol. Interesting story. I think the other thing that's interesting about the King George Hotel is that Michael, a gentleman named Michael DeAngelo, purchased the property. He has completely refurbished it. So all of these are deluxe condos at the top. They're beautiful properties. And of course, downstairs are commercial properties. For a long time, they've been commercial properties. This area here used to be a tea house. I wrote an article for Newmarket today when I talked about the Metropolitan Railway coming up here. And one of the things that I talked about, and there was a picture in that article, was a picture of the tea house that was here, or tea room that was here. And they actually advertised it all over Ontario, because I guess it was that special, this tea room. It was just apparently an awesome place. Of course, over the years, it was removed. And talk is that eventually it will become a tea room again. Like Michael would like to turn it back into a tea room. And again, you mentioned stables at the back. At the very end, we're going to take a look at the stables at the back, but there were stables at the back. They were rebuilt and converted into first shops and finally to townhouses. You see a little glimmer of it. You're going to see a better picture in a few minutes. But this is the extension that was built onto the King George Hotel. This was built, excuse me, in the 40s, and it allowed them to have, of course, more rooms. As well, there was a restaurant back here, and I don't know if you remember, Victoria, but Herb, you probably remember the bus depot was back here, and this is where the office was for the bus depot. Great coach, bus depot. And there's also a gas station back there as well. So this is that part of it. Dr. Peck moved around a lot. This is another Dr. Peck building or office building. The interesting thing about this, I think, is that the people that bought it, and it went into somewhat disrepair, that bought it, asked me for pictures that I had for the last 60 or 70 years of the building, and they remodeled it. So next time you come to Newmarket, you need to take a look at this place. There's an upscale restaurant in here, but they took off all this awful aluminum and put it back to brick. It's a beautiful building now. So that's nice. That's nice that I could contribute the pictures to, so that they could restore it to the way it was. I'm moving a little more quickly because, of course, I don't want to keep you forever. This is an extension, of course, to the King George Hotel. You get a better view of the tea room. Now that part of that tea room has been turned into the George Pub, which is kind of nice. When I took this picture, they hadn't opened this all up, so it's now all one, and it's a pub. And there's still people, of course, living above it. And it's really, really nice. Michael has spent, millions of dollars fixing this all up. Michael's what I call a good citizen. He has bought properties, and he's gone to an very extreme payment of money to fix up his property the way it was and clean it all up. So that's why I call him a good citizen. Dr. Bentley's drugstore. Dr. Bentley was a local doctor. Next door, we say the Onyx was where he used to see his patients, and next door he had his own drugstore. This has been, of course, a lot of things over the years. I don't know what you would remember it as back in the 50s or the 40s, but it's been a lot of things, a lot of stores along the way. And again, it's been fixed up kind of nicely now, which is good. This funny little building was a bank. Now it's a series of little shops. It's kind of an ugly building, I think. It was built when they did the extension to the King George Hotel. As I say, for a long time when I was growing up, it was Bank of Nova Scotia, I believe. The Bank of Nova Scotia. I think it was the Bank of Nova Scotia when I was growing up. Anyway, it's kind of a funny looking little building, but recently they've been working to restore it, which is good. One of the things that I noticed here, this goes right back a lot further than you think. It goes way back to the end of the parking lot, and it's got a red brick chimney at the back. I didn't really realize this until I was smart enough to walk behind the building, and I was able to see the back of it. The front's not very pretty, but the back is quite interesting. And it was built, one thing they did do is they built it to align with all the buildings that are adjacent to it, which is pretty good. This was Joseph's barbershop. It's still a barbershop today. It was purchased by Dominic, a gentleman named Dominic, so it's still a barbershop today. It's been there forever. If you go back in time and you look at what buildings have been in there, it always seems to have been a barbershop. So that's interesting. Beautiful building, two-story red brick. I like red brick. What I like is it's always had, well, I say always. Certainly, if I take a look at pictures from the 40s and 50s, it had this. Some people tell me that it's always had an awning going back to, to the 20s and 30s. So that's kind of interesting. But it's a nice building. Boyd's. This is an old building in terrible shape. Gone in. I said to Charles, to Ted, who owns it now. It's Charles Boyd's son. I said, you need to fix this up. You could tell it's an old building. You go in, all the floors are tilted. The walls look like they're going to fall down. It's an old building. But his argument is that people come in to buy insurance. He's not selling anything. Nobody is staying in there. He assures me it's safe. But at some point, you're probably going to have to do something. As you can see, he didn't fix the front of it, so you got the original stucco and wood front. And as I say, inside it's very interesting, to say the least. Two-star, this was a house. I probably should have mentioned that to you. This was a house originally, and then it was turned into a business. So it was an original two-story framed house. And they built the storefront on the front of it. That's probably the reason why all the floors are tilted, is because it was originally a house. And as you can see, you can read yourself all about it. This is the Bentley building. When I was a kid, this was Broadbent Bakery. Best place to go and buy baked goods. As long as I've lived, I've never found a better place to go and buy baked goods. But this was, before it was Broadbent's, it was Dr. Bentley's office where he would see his patients. And it's actually plaqued, the Dr. Thomas Bentley building. So again, kind of an interesting building. Again, flat roof. Times Square. Most people remember this as Times Square. The interesting thing is this was the original location for Canadian Tire. A gentleman named Mr. Spillett bought a Canadian Tire franchise. From what I understand, it was the 4th Canadian Tire franchise awarded and the 2nd one built. So this was a Canadian Tire store, and it's hard to believe, but they actually fixed cars here and sold tires and stuff like that. But most people know it as Times Square. It's a convenience store. At one time, it was owned by the gentleman who was the lead singer for Rush. His family owned it. So, the big thing used to be as a kid is to go in and see if he was working behind the counter, because often Geddy Lee was his name. He was performed with Rush, and you could quite often go in and see Geddy Lee working the counter in the convenience store because his family owned it. Sorry to move so quickly. This, of course, now is the karate shop owned by Mr. Jones. But when I was growing up, this was the cinema. This was where the Odeon cinema. This is where I went to see films. What can I say? It was completely restored by Mr. Jones, and it's a beautiful, beautiful building. And if you go in on the ground floor, you can still see the sunken floor where you used to sit, and watch of course, the movie screen was down lower, so you can still go in and see what a movie screen was, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, that picture of Times Square, I don't like it too. This is a particularly ugly building, but this was the reason I like to talk about this is that you can see behind it that there's a house. This originally was a house, and there's actually people living in there. And then they decided, oh, what we'll do is we'll just build this front part and turn it into a commercial. So this is a commercial building, awful looking commercial building. Still is an awful looking commercial building. Hasn't been fixed up very much, but you've got a hair salon, and this area now is a place where you can go and have your nails done. But again, the interesting thing about this is they just built a square front on it, on a house that was one of the original houses built there, which I think is kind of interesting. The old Loblaws building, I don't know if Loblaws was around when you were a kid, Herb, but when I was growing up, this was where a lot of people went shopping. The interesting thing about this building was on the back of it, I should have a picture of that, but on the back of it, the building was built so that it actually was built over the river. So when you came into the store, you would walk up a sort of a walkway, and then you would walk over the river to get into the building, which is kind of interesting. So they say start off as a Nesbitt store. So it was a place where they sold cars. and then it was purchased and remodeled, and it became the Loblaws grocery store. Now it is divided into several different buildings or different businesses. One of them is a lawyer, another one is a real estate place. This building, it was part of the whole complex, as you can see. Whole complex but it's all one building, and you get a better view of the house that sits behind. I'm amazed at how many people I talk to when we do these walking tours, and I talk about the house behind, and people who have lived here for 30, 40, 50, even 60 years have said, oh, wow, there's a house behind there. Yes, there is indeed a house behind there, but people don't notice it. They just, for whatever reason, just notice the stores. So that's, I think, probably the interesting parts of that store. This is Broughton's Appliances. And again, Mr. Broughton was in business forever and ever and ever. And it's a cute little business. What's cute about it was that they just stuck it in there. This used to be a walkway. And as you can see, they just built it. Not particularly nice building. They built it. Doesn't even match the buildings around it. So it was pretty obvious that it was added later. But on the plus side, I guess, is that it's been kept up. It now is a little restaurant, a Korean restaurant, and they have fixed it up very nicely. So I guess that's a plus to it. There's only one story. It's called infill, which means that somebody just shoved it in there. No thought was given, I guess, to did it match the buildings around it. You notice they are brick, and it's just an little aluminum thing. So that is worthy of looking at. The Strand Theatre Building. Well, when you were growing up, you probably thought of it as the Bonanza. It's been a lot of things, but it was originally it was the Strand Theatre, which was the very first theatre that was built in Newmarket. If you go into this building, the people that own the building have maintained the old auditorium at the back, which was part of the theater. So you can go in and take a look at it. So it's pretty cool, and it's a nice building, as I say. I can't imagine why they would want to move from this building across the road, but they did, and it's been relatively untouched by fire. But you notice it's yellow bricks, so that indicates that it was built with the famous bricks that were made here in Newmarket. Here's the Scotia Bank. It was there when I was a kid. One of the things that's worth mentioning, and then we'll move on, was that see this. There's the house there. There's the Cawthra building. This actually used to be part of the Cawthra building. The Cawthra building, this was his house, and this was his bank. And so this whole area is relatively new because this building used to extend over to where this house is. And you can see on the wall the fact that there used to be something up against it. This was taken down, but this is where the vaults used to be. And the interesting thing is that when Scotiabank went in there, one of the reasons for them picking this place was because they were able to get the old vault from that was there when it was part of the Cawthra building, and it was part of a bank. And if you took my ghost tour, I would be telling you that people who worked in this bank used to tell stories about the fact that if you were there at night, you would see this figure walk through the wall from the Cawthra building into their building and go into the old vault and walk back, obviously not talking to anybody. And the person always had a ledger in their hand. And the rumor always was that this was from the fact that it used to be an old bank before it became Scotiabank. It used to be part of the Cawthra building, and that this was one of the auditors not realizing that there was another building here and walking through the wall. I personally don't believe in ghosts, but probably my most popular tour is the ghost tour. Go figure. We're getting to the end. This was Eve's Ladies Wear. This is part of the same building as the that was part of the theater. I don't know what I can say about it. It's part of the same building, but it's got, you know, it's different at the front, so you can get an idea what the rest of the building used to look like. Because this hasn't been fixed up, but this has the nice yellow brick. And on the corner we have Cousins Dairy building. This building was Cousins when I was young. It's been a couple of, over the years, it's been doctor's office, it's been a deli, as you can see, it's been a real estate office, it's been a lot of things. It's kind of I think it's kind of a nice building right on the corner. I kind of like the fact that it's a two-story. It used to match all the buildings along, but over the years, different buildings have had renovations, and so it no longer matches. But it's a 2.5-story building, as you can see. It's got an aluminum front. And in a second, I'll tell you what's unique about this whole side of the street, but we'll continue on. This is the John Cothra house. This is actually a house, as I said. And this house used to extend, as I say, over to where the Nova Scotia Bank was. Now this is gone. You know, Scotia Bank moved off Main Street, and this became a bunch of little businesses in here. This is a nice house. If you ever get the opportunity during open house to go and take a look at it, it's quite nice. Cothras were the family in Newmarket at one time. So, and you could read, I wrote an article about the Cothras, so you could, if you're interested in the Cothra family, you can read my article on Newmarket Today about the Cothra building. This is the extension that was built for the United Church. The reason I put this in is that the United Church was one of the first buildings, one of the first churches to build an extension, realizing that they needed to be more than a church. And so they built this extension with an auditorium and meeting places. So it's a real complex. So it's one of the first churches that built onto their church to modernize it and to become more than just a place of worship, which I think is kind of interesting. Here you are. Here's your stables, Herb. This is the former stables for the King George Hotel. Yes, there was a fire there, but they never burned to the ground. So they were restored. And when they were first restored, they put in stores in here. So they were all different artisan, is that the word? They were all artist stores. So candle maker, you know, that sort of thing. They didn't do very well. So then they turned them into upmarket townhouses, and that's what they are today. And they're very nice inside, well located, nice quiet street out here. So there's actually eight bays and 2 original brick chimneys on the building. So you say you remember this. When they were restoring it, you would have been interested, or when they were restoring it, they found all of the horse stalls, and in some cases they found hay and stuff like that under the floorboards. So, you know, it was pretty interesting when they were doing the restoration. I went down and watched them do it. And then, of course, is that you know, out here, if you can see, out here is Market Square. Across the road, of course, is the Old Town Hall. So this, I think, it'd be a pretty cool place to live. And our final spot on our tour here is going to be, and this is an old picture, this is called the Robinson Garage. This became known because this is where you went to buy a Ford product. It was also a gas station. Looks almost identical now. It's been fixed up, looks identical. It's now a rooming house. What's interesting is you see where these cars are, and of course, I don't have a picture that shows, but there's a house over here, and then this is all open. This is where the Metropolitan Railroad train used to go. So behind Main Street, they took it off Main Street, of course, at the turn of the century, and they put it behind Main Street because basically the train scared the horses, so they moved it behind Main Street, and so you can still to this day see the tracks going up behind Main Street, beside the old town hall, all the way up behind Main Street to Raglan, where it comes back out to Main Street. And this, as I say, it's an open courtyard beside the building, and still is. Nobody's ever built there. I don't know why, but nobody's ever built in there. So thank you very much for sticking with me. Let me just get back so we can look at each other. So sorry I took so long. So much for my hour and 15 minutes. But thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting the the In From the Cold. If you want more information on anything I do, of course, I'm on Facebook. Everybody knows that. You can also go and see me on one of my presentations as soon as we're able to get out. I do presentations, usually about 40 or 50 a year, out in the community and farther afield. Write the article currently for the paper. I do 3 other articles, so I'm a fairly busy guy. I do my oral history, film my oral history. As I said, today we have an article on Simpson, Robert Simpson, so I encourage you to take a look at that. And all the buildings that I looked at, because we moved on, you can take a look at the articles, because I talk in greater length about those buildings, and about fires, about everything. So you can